And in this section, we'll have a quick view on diabetes, which is the most prevalent metabolic disease. So this is the ancient Greek physician Aretaeus, and he was among the first physicians to characterize type 2 diabetes 2000 years ago. And here's one interesting observation he had made, which is the melting down of flesh and limbs into urine. So he was actually describing polyuria or frequent urination associated with diabetes. Okay, there are two major types of diabetes, which are type 1 and type 2 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes is also known as the insulin dependent diabetes because patients have absolute insulin deficiency. In other words, they get no insulin production at all due to the destruction of their beta cells. So this could happen due to accident or more commonly by an autoimmune disease by which they produce antibodies against their own beta cells. So how do we treat type 1 diabetes? Well, these patients have to receive insulin injection for their whole lifetime, or else they have to undergo beta cell transplant or having some stem cell therapy, which is still under development. So about 5 to 10% of the patients are coming from this category. Now, how about type 2 diabetes? It is known as the non-insulin dependent diabetes because for these patients, they have their insulin production, but their tissues and organs fail to respond to the insulin. In other words, they develop insulin insensitivity or they develop insulin resistance. So most of the patients, which is about 90 to 95%, are coming from this category. So initially, these patients of type 2 diabetes have normal or even increased insulin production so that they can compensate for the insulin resistance. But during the late phase of the disease, because of the overwork conditions of beta cells pumping more insulin, at last they will have insulin deficiency due to the destruction of beta cells. So how do we treat type 2 diabetes? Well, first of all, we can reverse type 2 diabetes by having a healthy diet, exercise, and we can use insulin secretagogues to boost the secretion of insulin during the late phase. And we can use insulin sensitizers to boost the insulin sensitivity during the early phase of the disease. Okay, here I just want to show you an example of type 1 diabetes. So this boy here is having type 1 diabetes, which means there was no insulin production. So although that the blood sugar level is really high, but because of the lack of insulin, those glucose molecules cannot be imported from the bloodstream into his cells, especially the muscle and the adipose cells. In other words, the cells are starving and the cells are struggling to survive by breaking down fats and proteins. So this explains why this boy was very skinny. But upon treatment with insulin injection after 6 months, you can see how the boy had regained his health. So in diabetes, because insulin is not working, glucagon has a larger effect towards your metabolism by generating more glucose molecule. So that will cause hyperglycemia. In other words, without insulin, we cannot get the glucose into our cells. And this high level of glucose is going to cause a lot of problems. One of them is by causing cataract or the clouding of the lens. So this happens when you have the accumulation of sorbitol, which is converted from glucose by reduction. It also causes angiopathy or the disease of blood vessels with a thickening wall and creating blood clot that kills the tissues. It also damages the nerves, leading to neuropathy. So the longest nerves are the ones connected to your feet. So you start to lose sensation with your feet, you might hurt your feet and bleed profusely, but you will not feel due to the diabetes condition. And then you will get gangrene. So because of the glucose in your bloodstream, bacteria love to colonize your body tissue, especially with your feet. So with gangrene, it can lead to amputation of your feet. And not only that, you'll get nephropathy, which is kidney failure. So that's because with high sugar level, it can actually damage the tiny blood capillaries within your kidneys. So this all happens because of hyperglycemia, and yet inside the cells are starved of energy because they cannot import any glucose from the bloodstream. And as a result, you have to break down glycogen, break down fat, you have to increase gluconeogenesis, break down protein so that the cells can get enough glucose to survive. So this is what exactly described by the Greek physician, which is the melting down of the body. Okay, one classical symptom of diabetes is called diuresis or frequent urination. That happens when you have too much glucose entering your glomerulus. So what happens when you have glucose in the kidney? Well, our body can reabsorb those glucose to prevent leaking and wastage. But our body can reabsorb up to a certain limit, which is 10 millimolar. So anything higher than 10 millimolar, which is the cutoff point to call diabetes, the sugar is going to be urinated out of the body. But how does hyperglycemia causes frequent urination? Well, that's because glucose is an osmotically active component. It has many polar OH groups that can attract water molecules. As a result, you will get frequent urination with diabetes. And due to the loss of water, diabetic patients will also encounter polydipsia or being thirsty at all time. And now here's a quick question I would like you to answer. So try to fill up the names for each of these reactions in the diagram. And here are the answers. The conversion of glucose into pyruvate is known as glycolysis, while the reverse pathway to generate new glucose molecule is called gluconeogenesis. And the breakdown of glycogen is called glycogenolysis, while the synthesis of glycogen is called glycogenesis. And from the acetyl coenzyme A, you have a cycle, which is the citric acid cycle or the Krebs cycle, to produce NADH and FADH2 and GTP. So those high energy electron carriers such as FADH2 and NADH can then undergo the oxidative phosphorylation for ATP production. With that, we have come to the end of this session. Thank you.